Well, good day, everybody. This is Nick Vlahos on Nick in the Morning, the podcast, and we are joined this day by one veteran member of the Journal-Star sports staff, the one and only Dave Eminian. How are you today, sir?
I'm wonderful, and thank God we're not actually doing this in the morning because I'm not a morning guy.
Well, you know what? Neither am I, but I still come in the morning anyway. It's okay when you get used to it. You know, you can say the same thing about somebody banging in the head with a brick all day. You know, once you get used to it, it's okay.
You went to college with me. How often was I in any of those morning classrooms with you?
That was a nice thing about being a journalism major or a communications major. Most of the classes were in the afternoon.
Yeah.
You didn't have to worry about getting
I didn't make a lot of those either.
Yeah, well, you know, we're going to get to that actually at some point. David has been covering the Peoria Rivermen probably longer than almost the Rivermen have been around. I mean, it's been what, 1985? Is that when you started?
This is my 33rd season.
Wow.
And 36th for the team, for the franchise.
Right. The Prancers is what they were originally known.
2 years as the Prancers, right. And then the first year in 84-85 as the Rivermen. And then, of course, they won a championship that year, and we made some staff changes, and I took that beat over in 85-86.
That was 82, I think, is when the Prancers started, and that's actually a really good year because that's the year Dave and I first met each other.
Yeah.
Because we both lived in the same dorm at Bradley University.
Williams Hall.
No, not Williams Hall. It was Fredonia Hall.
Is it Fredonia?
Yeah,
the temporary
The
place?
temporary dorm was a
Williams
temporary
too.
dorm on right across from some of the fraternity houses there on Fredonia Avenue.
It's gone now.
It's gone. It was gone then.
I remember that place. You could talk to your next door neighbor right through the wall because it was just a thin piece of plywood paneling that didn't always even reach the ceiling.
Yeah, it was all prefab, and it was a great place to live. But at the same time, you know, it was great when you were like 19. I don't know if it'd be so great like today.
Oh, I'd lose my mind in there.
Oh, it'd be crazy. And not a place you'd want your kids to necessarily live in either.
Yeah.
But you know, we both started working at the Journal-Star part time in about 83, 84, 85, in that era there, and then. You know, I graduated and left town, got a master's degree, and eventually came back. But you stayed around. Now, how did you end up becoming the Rivermen beat writer?
Well, I had, as you mentioned, I was on that part-time staff in the sports department, and geez, I remember our assistant editor back then, Dick Lean, had called me on the Bradley campus, called me in my dorm room, and said, "Hey, would you like to cover something for the Journal-Star?" I hadn't debuted yet. I said, "Sure, what do you got?" Women's swimming right on the campus. Okay, when? 12 minutes from now.
You know what? I got a call just like that. The first thing I ever covered was a men's swim meet at Bradley, and it literally was, what are you doing right now? It's like, well, not really anything. It's like, can you go over to Hostler Hall and cover Bradley and Northerner in a swim meet? It's like, what time does it start? Oh, about a half hour. It's like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I was like, oh, well, okay, I guess I'm debuting. So it's better sometimes to not have to think about it. But I just launched right into that, and after a couple years of working as a part-timer, and you've been on that turf, you know what that's like. The Rivermen burst onto the scene in a sizable way by winning a championship in the 84-85 season. Sellout crowd in Carver Arena, people throwing roses on the ice while they're parading the cup, and I think the newspaper at that time recognized that they were going to be a big thing in this market, and decided to make some changes in coverage. And long story short, by the 85-86 season, I was that beat writer, mostly because it was a beat nobody really wanted on our sports staff. I mean, we didn't have hockey-oriented people. At the time, I was one of only two guys on that staff that had ever seen any number of hockey games. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. You know, I'm a 24-year-old kid. I'll go for this. Why not? And here I am 33 years later, still covering that team and in its various incarnations over the decades. And it's a great beat.
The team is a survivor in a lot of ways, just like yourself. Just like yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, did you ever envision when this started in 85 that 32, 33 years later, you'd still be covering the team?
No way. I was, I was at Bradley as a journalism student, but I had a father who was a major advertising executive on the national level. And
you're from Cleveland originally, for people who don't know. His nickname is Cleve,
hence,
and that's where it comes
the
from.
Twitter handle, Icetime Cleve. Born and raised, 30 years there. Unfortunate side effect of that is I'm a lifetime Browns and Indians fan.
We'll get to that.
I suffer. But you know, I was going to finish here at Bradley and go back to Cleveland and join my father in his advertising agency and work as an ad exec. But I got into this because I liked the writing and I like in sports in particular, the notion that every day, every assignment is something new around a different corner. You know, no two games are alike. You're meeting different athletes, different sports. It was just a really appealing challenge and variety to me. So that's the more I did it, the more I liked it. And then, of course, I also met a girl from Peoria.
There's always a girl.
And when you meet a girl from Peoria and marry the girl, you marry Peoria. And it's kind of what happened there. A lot of opportunities to cover NHL teams at other papers over the years. But, you know, Deb said, no, we're staying right here. And I said, yes, ma'am.
That's right. Yep. Yes, honey. And you kind of go from there. How much did you know about hockey when you first started covering the Rivermen?
A little bit, not a whole. I mean, I would not have been what you call a ready-made hockey writer by any means. You know, I had followed it growing up in Cleveland. We had the old Cleveland Barons and then the Cleveland Crusaders with guys like Jerry Pinder and Jerry Cheevers and those were Denny Marouk. Those were good, exciting teams. And I went to a lot of those games, followed them really closely. We had, in the mid-'70s, an NHL team for 2 seasons, and that was really it. And it went away. I mean, it was always a Browns and Indians town. Later on, the Cavaliers were born and came to be. And high school sports were an afterthought in that market. It was a major league level pro sports market.
Sure.
And hockey wasn't there anymore, so it became a back burner issue. But when I got into this beat, I got lucky. I got a guy who was coach of the Rivermen and GM at the time, Pat Kelly, and you know, he was an old warhorse and had coached in the NHL in Colorado, and later, after his Peoria years, went on to be a co-founder of what is now the ECHL. Hockey's AA level of the pro game. And we were there together for 5 years in this market, my first 5, and he taught me everything. I mean, he would sit there and we'd go over, you know, he'd chalk talk with me and show me systems, and we'd look at scouting reports, and he taught me how to do those things, and I learned the game from him, and it was a blessing in the end.
How patient was he?
Oh, very patient. He was an old school Irish guy from St. Catharines, Ontario, up in Canada, and just a good guy, you know. And I learned that old school philosophy from him, which I still carry today, you know. And I see that. I've seen that over the years pop up in different coaches. I've had a lot of coaches to work with.
Well, you also had some good players and some interesting players to cover right when you first came on the beat too. And some of those guys are still around town. Guys like Brad Kempthorne, you know, Bob the Hammer Fleming, of course, was here for a long time. He's out in Vegas now.
Yeah, old
Hammer.
You know,
Dennis Sear. Did you ever expect to see Dennis Sear as a city councilman in Peoria someday?
Not in my wildest dreams. There's hope for me as a future president. That's all I'm going to say.
And that's the only thing that's stopping Dennis, right, is the fact that he's a Canadian citizen. You probably can't, or he was born in Canada. I guess
if you guys elect me, I will make America drunk again.
So there were so many times that it looked like the Rivermen were going to be moving away or going away. The first time, I guess, was when Bruce Sowers stepped in and kind of saved the franchise after the Civic Center had taken it over. What were those years like when the Civic Center had control of things?
Well, they were very difficult, very tense years. The Rivermen, born initially as the Peoria Prancers in 82, 83, and the first sports event ever at Carver Arena, were owned by a guy from Arizona named Ken Wilson. And after 2 years, he went belly up in the operation and left bills all over town. And I can remember Pat Kelly telling me stories that every Friday the paychecks would be issued to Kelly and to the players. And they would have to cancel practice on those days because guys would literally race each other down to the bank to try to cash those checks because there was never enough funds in the bank account to cash all of them. And that's
it's a good thing there wasn't a sheet of ice to the bank, or else you could really see some
absolutely. But that's what happened. And he was going to go under. The Civic Center, at that time was a 3-year-old building and had an ice plant in there, which cost 7 figures, to put into an arena. And they had an investment to protect. So the Civic Center took over ownership of the Rivermen in 84, 85 and changed the name from Prancers to Rivermen after a Journal-Star newspaper naming contest.
Yep.
Which
I remember that. I opened a lot of envelopes to see whose entries were in there.
The runner-up, by the way, was the Starfighters.
That's a good one.
Yeah, the Peoria Starfighters.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because we were right in that Star Wars era at the time. But anyway.
And we still are.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
It never ends.
No.
It's kind of like you and me. We just keep plugging along.
Just perpetual.
But the Civic Center took that over, and then it became pretty contentious very fast. Civic Center management in that era tended to shuffle debt around from department to department, and we later discovered that a lot of things that were accruing debt-wise in one department would get credited to the hockey team. And every spring, there would be a Civic Center Authority board meeting with a death penalty vote. Or, guys pounding their fists on the table. We're operating at $700,000, $900,000 deficit, and if we eliminated the hockey team, it would look better with this and this and this. And you had to endure that, and you never knew when those guys were actually going to pull the trigger on that. And finally, we did an investigative piece, which
I remember
was an award-winning piece.
Yep.
I teamed with Kirk Wessler, our sports editor, on that.
Thin Ice, it was called.
Yes, on thin ice.
Yep.
And exposed a lot of that. Resignations followed, and the Civic Center board was not so gently reminded that they were never supposed to hang on to the team, which at the time, under their ownership, was the only government-owned pro hockey team in North America.
They were supposed to transition to another private ownership someplace.
So they put the team up for sale, and Bruce Sowers bought that team in the summer of '89 for $250,000. And the rest is history. He stepped in, took the risk. 2 years later, they won 18 straight games and made really worldwide news with a professional hockey record win streak. Won a championship. Had a parade here downtown. I remember there were thousands of people out there on the street greeting those guys. And it solidified their place in this market and launched them. And today, Peoria's market, the city, is the 7th longest continually operating pro sports franchise in the country, in North America, actually. And that's saying something in a place that is a traditional basketball and prep sports town in a mid-sized Midwest market. So.
Well, I mean, some people probably, I'm sure, remember Bruce Sowers for when he was a basketball coach at the high school level, and some others remember his TV commercials when he was at Bellevue Ford. What was Bruce Sowers like?
Oh, he was. I could tell you stories, but you'd have to have the bleep on because most of his stories involved, rough language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
And one of my favorites is an opening night at Carver Arena. I think it was like a 7-5 or 7-6 game, just back and forth and wide open, and all the NHL scouts and the Blues front office people. They were the parent club of the Rivermen in those days. They're on the elevator with Bruce, and we get on there, and they're all talking it up and clapping it up and yelling, and then there's like this 10 seconds of dead silence, and Bruce just blurts out, "I don't like this bleeping team."
Well, it's comforting words from the owner, isn't it?
Yeah, and that brought a lot of people back down to earth fast, and that's the kind of guy he was. He was blunt and direct, extremely generous, and yet insisted on results, and he would take risks. I mean, he signed a fabulous little centerman named Michel Mongeau, who in the era of the 80s and early 90s was considered by NHL scouts to be probably the best player not in the NHL at that time, and later was in the NHL as Brett Hull's center. But he signed him to a $650,000 minor league contract in the IHL, which at the time was the largest in the history of that league.
It's pretty amazing to think about.
Yeah.
He paid $250,000 for the whole team. Now he's sending one player to more than double that.
And that league, with him sitting there presiding in the expansion committees and things like that, that league grew from 9 teams when he got in it. I believe it was eight or 9 to 28, and coast to coast, San Diego, Chicago, San Francisco, Houston, Milwaukee, major cities, Orlando, Miami, and the expansion fee in that league at that time was $8 million. And so he had a good eye for business too. And he was an interesting guy on a day-to-day basis. Very, very hard to work for because he was very demanding.
Yeah.
I was there a lot of times. I'd watch him walk into his front office and blow his staff up because they just weren't selling enough. He always wanted more, pushing. And he was not a guy who treaded very lightly with the Civic Center as landlords either. I mean, he would come straight out and very bluntly tell them when he thought things were not of good enough quality, or when he thought that the game and the fan base and the team was being disrespected.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, he also didn't really know a lot about hockey when he first bought the franchise,
nothing
right?
at all.
This was more just like something that he did on behalf of the city to preserve the franchise.
Absolutely. It was a philanthropic move at the outset. He had not watched any hockey. He was a basketball and baseball guy, and a big Bradley basketball fan, and of course with a string of wildly successful car dealerships. And he came in, and they got him to watch a game, and he fell in love with it. And I've seen that happen to a lot of people over the years, and it's not that uncommon.
Yeah, it's a fun game to watch.
Well, I remember a story Kirk Wessler told me once about one of his sons. I think he's got 14 of them, but whichever one it was.
Kirk is the Journal Star sports editor, for those who don't know.
And he took one of his little ones to his first Rivermen game, and he was telling me afterward, yeah, boy, he loved it. And I asked him if he wanted to go get a hot dog, and he said, not right now, I'm watching the game. And it just appealed to people that way. Yeah. I mean, it's nonstop action. It's for years they billed it as the fastest game in town. And when you think about hockey athletes, there's elements of baseball and football in that, the physicality of football, the hand-to-eye of puck and stick that is akin to baseball, and they're doing it while moving on ice, while somebody else is trying to interfere with what they're doing.
Takes an awful lot of coordination and an awful lot of like guile and guts.
I always tell people, you want to know what it's like to try to hit a hockey puck. Put your Sunday dress shoes on, go stand on a sheet of ice with a baseball bat and try to swing and hit a pitch while the catcher is pushing you from behind. That's what those guys are doing.
Good luck.
Yeah. And it's they're amazing athletes. And the hockey culture also is pretty glorious, I think. They're just good people to talk to and to work with. They'll do anything.
You were talking about how the ECHL becomes such a big, almost like a big city league in a lot of ways. After the Sours came in and bought the team, that kind of also led to them departing, or the breakup of the league, and then departing it and going to the ECHL, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I mean, at its height, the ECHL was really a Class 4A level league. It was competing a little bit for NHL free agents. The goaltender, Sean Burke, signed a $1.2 million deal to play for San Diego in the IHL while he was holding out for a contract in the NHL. Mm-hmm. And there were guys who were going through the NHL draft instead of signing with the NHL team that drafted them. IHL teams were trying to lure them. And it was positioning itself as a competitor. And it was an overreach. I mean, you were what had started out as a Midwest league, bus league for 50 years, became an airplane national league and really international because it had Canadian teams in it too. And it just collapsed under that cost structure. And a number of those teams went into the American Hockey League, like Chicago, Houston, and Milwaukee. And the Rivermen, again, Sours, reading those tea leaves, got out ahead of that and put Peoria in the what was then called the East Coast Hockey League. Now it's just simply an acronym, ECHL. Mm-hmm. And went through another great era, 9 seasons as the winningest franchise in that league. Jason
Christie, player, coach, championship winner.
Another old school, hard-nosed guy who helped lead that team to a championship in the 99-2000 season, and then went on to be coach for the next 5 years after that. A great guy.
Was there a big fear that with the drop in league, I suppose, that the talent level would also drop as well, and maybe the fan enthusiasm might drop too?
Absolutely. That was a big part of that calculation. And the talent level did drop. I mean, it was a AA league, and really in those days, the ECHL, probably the best 5 players on an ECHL team were bottom 5 roster spots on an IHL team, if you want to relate it that way. It was just the drop from a high AAA level league to a AA level league. And Peoria supported it. And again, that's the uniqueness of this market. Their attendance dropped to about 1,400 a game at the outset. They had been drawing 5,400 and dropped down to around 4,000. And then they came back and slowly built back, and the fan base fell in love with that level of play and those players. They're very accessible guys. These were players who would stay around after games to meet with the fans, sign every autograph, take every picture. And I think, while that 90-91 championship team in the IHL was probably the greatest team, one of the greatest teams in minor league hockey history, certainly the greatest one in this organization's history, I think that ECHL was probably Peoria's golden era for the game overall.
Even with the heights that they exceeded, they hit in 90-91, that this one, at least the combination of the way the play on the team and the fan support.
The connection to absolutely. From the fans' point of view, I would think the ECHL was probably their golden era.
It's interesting you would say that. I would, because people think, well, the IHL, that's the top of the mountain as far as minor league hockey is concerned.
And it was great. I mean, no doubt about it. Would love to jump in a time machine and go back there and cover a season again. I mean, those were pretty fun days. But the connection and the travel, the fan buses loaded up and going to away games, all those things happened in a stronger degree in the ECHL.
Now we've dropped again. Peoria has, the Rivermen has, another level.
Right.
Down to where they're at now. How did that all come about, and what is the state of the franchise, I guess, at this point, too?
Well, it came about when the Blues decided that they didn't need their own farm team anymore. It became the only NHL team not to have an entire and exclusive farm club, and sold the charter, the piece of paper that was the Rivermen franchise in the AHL, to Vancouver, and put their players in a shotgun wedding with the Chicago Wolves in the AHL. The Wolves were a renowned independent operator and spent big money on free agent players. They wanted to win. They went head to head with the Blackhawks, I think, at one time, especially when the Blackhawks were at their nadir. I mean, before the Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews era, we're talking about 15, 20 years ago. It was definitely that way. I mean, I can remember they'd buy billboards mocking the Blackhawks all over Chicago.
They would outdraw the Blackhawks a lot of times.
And they did. Yeah, absolutely. And that owner was a billionaire, Don Levin. But the Blues went up there, instead of having 25 players that they contracted and owned and operated in Peoria, they had 12 that they added to the Chicago team. So that's where they went. That's where those players went. That left Peoria, without a hockey team for a few weeks, and Vancouver Canucks came in and said, we might stay a couple of years here and extend your stay in the AHL, and you can be our farm team. But you got to, the city has to agree to subsidize any deficit we operate at. Well,
good luck.
Yeah, that was a deal breaker before there was even a chance for a deal. So they went on to Utica and put their farm team in Utica. So the paperwork shell that was the Rivermen of the American Hockey League is in Utica today. The players that were here went up to Chicago. And Peoria was in a void. So, at that point, your options are the ECHL or the Southern Professional Hockey League. Nobody stepped forward for an ECHL team, and the ECHL at the time wanted Peoria to go dark for an entire year operationally before it put an ownership group together and attempted to move into that league again.
That would have been almost a death knell for hockey in Peoria,
wouldn't it? I think
so.
I can remember being asked by the Civic Center Authority to come to a meeting, and they asked me questions about their various options and whether or not the Southern Professional Hockey League could work as an alternative. And I told them, it can work if the building works with the team as if it was a co-owner, a partner, because there won't be a lot of margin for error at this level. And then Bart Rogers and John Butler put a group together with Bruce Sowers, who had been in retirement, and they made the save. They got a franchise in the Southern Professional Hockey League, kept the name, the colors, and the record book, and the team continued on at the Class A level.
So for the second or third time, it's like the Rivermen come back from the dead. It's like yet another resurrection. I mean, how would you assess the play in the SPHL compared to what it's been in the other leagues that the Rivermen have been in? And what do you think about how fans react to it? Do you think that that's changed at all?
I think that certainly they've lost some fans along the way. A certain number with each time you move down a level, you lose people, and it's very hard. Oh my gosh! I mean, to go from an AHL franchise for 8 seasons, where literally night to night you're seeing up to a dozen players on the ice here in Peoria that have just come down from the NHL or will be going up to it within days. You're going from that level of the game to clear down to the Class A level. The SPHL is an entry-level pro league. Honest players, what I call want-to hockey. You got to want to be a hockey player to play at this level because nobody's getting rich.
Are these guys under any kind of contract with an NHL club, or
No.
this is all independent?
No, by rule, the SPHL doesn't allow NHL contracted players or former NHL players to be in this league. They want it to be college kids that are coming out for their first time as a pro, guys who have slipped through the cracks through the draft, and it's your first time, your first shot at pro hockey for the most part. And there are some veteran guys who hang around in this league. Each team's allowed 3 of those, but that's really what this league is. It's an honest, hardworking pro level. It's, I would say, very similar to what the ECHL was right around the time Peoria would have joined the ECHL in 1996. It's not that different from it. And if you look at this league right now, Peoria today has 6 players on call-up to ECHL teams. That's 6 guys playing at what is now a high AA level league. So again, to correlate it to rosters from the different levels, the top 6 or 7 guys on these SPHL teams, on the good ones at least, can play in the ECHL without question. I mean, you're seeing AA players at this level.
What kind of staying power do you think this league and this franchise have at this point?
I think that it would really help the Rivermen and be wise for the league to do something to get into expand its territory here in the Midwest. Peoria needs Midwestern opponents.
Because as the name would suggest, the Southern League, most of the teams are in the South.
Yeah. I mean, Evansville was added last year.
That helps.
That's a great thing for Peoria. But outside of that, you're on a bus to places like Fayetteville and Huntsville and Pensacola. And, you may as well get put in one of those cryogenic tubes and shipped there. Because, I mean, that's a real haul. I mean, that's pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, there were some bus trips in the ECHL too, but you're going to, Johnstown and Wheeling and places like that. That's not nearly as far as going.
Well, and I was on a few of those where we'd go down to Birmingham, play, continue on down to Lafayette, Louisiana, and then go through the I-10 corridor and play Mobile and Biloxi and Pensacola and turn around and come all the way back. New Orleans, Baton Rouge. Those were all cities in the ECHL in that era that were down there. So at least you're out for 2 weeks, but your hops are short until you got to come home. That's a bad one. But in this league, Peoria will bus straight out to Fayetteville, play 2 games on the weekend, turn around and bus all the way back here. That takes a lot out of a guy.
Yeah, that's rough.
And that's why I respect these guys, because, man, I couldn't do it. And they're making probably the average salary in the league is $350 a week. Yeah,
our interns make more than that.
Yeah. So it's like it's passion at this level. You have to respect that they're out there doing what they're doing.
What do you think the future is for the Rivermen? I mean, how stable do you think they are? How do you see them? Are they going to be around in 5 years? They going to be around in 10 years? In what form? What do you think?
If they stay in this league, where the cost is oriented to, it's an ownership business model. It's favorable to ownership in this league. It's not a union league. Costs are tightly controlled. The Rivermen operated at break even last year, which in the pro sports, minor league hockey, pro sports business, it's unheard of.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
They can stay as long as they want to, because they've got a new owner, majority owner, in Bill Yill, who is up. He's a Canadian businessman. He's up in Canada and bought into the team, 80% of it, before the season started, and he's only worth $850 million. And
that's all. Is that Canadian or American?
Yeah, I don't care. I'd settle for either.
Exchange rate's kind of rough these days. I don't know.
I don't know, but he's he's going to write that check as long as he wants to. The interesting thing will be down the road whether or not he'll write a check and take a chance at an ECHL venture. They're under a 3-year lease right now with the Civic Center.
How far along are they in the lease?
This is the first year of, and they're in the SPHL, and that's fine. I think we're going to see in these next 3 years whether or not the SPHL can lure in these other teams in the Midwest market. Teams that might be struggling. I don't know that they are, but struggling in the ECHL, like Quad City and Kalamazoo and places like that. Something that can be
Fort
more
Wayne in that league
attractive.
too? I can't remember. Is Fort Wayne in that league also?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But Fort Wayne is. I've maintained for 20 years that Fort Wayne should be at the American Hockey League level.
They're a special case.
They really are. I mean, they're 7,000 plus every night. I don't know what the magic there is, but it's impressive. But
well, what are you going to do in Fort Wayne, right?
Well, I guess.
Says a guy from Peoria.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would like to see eventually that evolution, but only if it's healthy. I talk to this Rivermen ownership all the time, and they maintain that the operating costs there are significantly higher in the ECHL than they are in this league, and so you have to take a look at what your attendance trends are, and more importantly, what your business sponsorship trend is. Is the money there to back such a thing? And if it's not, then it's not. Then they'll continue on here and set their sights on making this league more attractive to Peoria's fan base.
You mentioned John Butler and Bert Rogers a little while ago, and as the saviors again or the saviors of the most recent time of the franchise, I suppose. Right. But they got in they're in legal trouble right now related to the arena in Bloomington. There's some financial malfeasance and some other things that are involved there. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's hard to watch those guys go through that. They haven't had their day in court yet, and I don't really know. I haven't asked them much about it, and our conversations are primarily hockey related. But I know them on a personal level to be good and honest people, and I hope that they come through it. I really do.
Norm Ulrich died earlier this year, not too long ago. And, a lot of people remember him as being an anchor man or sports guy in Channel 25. Yeah. He was also the voice of the Rivermen for a long time on the radio. And I know you two, were good friends, and you traveled the leagues together, I suppose, on the bus. What was he like?
He was a riot to be around. Very self-deprecating sense of humor. Norm, he was the voice for 14 seasons, over 1,000 games, and in the old IHL and in the ECHL, and a couple of games in the American Hockey League too. And he would talk mostly on those trips about the Cubs, baseball. He was an avid baseball guy. He played baseball when he was a Marine stationed at Pearl Harbor. And he had a tryout with the Cubs.
I didn't know that.
Yes, he did. Yeah, and he, as he liked to tell everybody, he tried out for third base that day, and he got beat out by some guy named Santo. So he said, "I don't feel too bad about it."
And then Santo became a radio guy himself, so it's like everything comes full circle.
It does,
at some point.
So he would talk endlessly about that, and then later on, in later years, he would talk about his grandkids, and just a very different guy off mic. On the mic, he had that rusty saw blade voice. His voice was made to do hockey, I thought, and just. That smoke-saturated voice. And,
a little bit of whatever his favorite alcoholic beverage was thrown on top of that. It was You certainly got the atmosphere listening to Norm. There was no doubt.
Yeah, oh, no doubt. And he knew when to bring it too, and raise the intensity level. And it was a lot of fun to watch him work. And you had to match his energy level if you were on the air with him, or he'd just bury you.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can still remember some of his calls too. 3.6.
Yeah,
when
3.6.
That was awesome.
The ECHL Kelly Cup final call when they clinched it. That was probably the most amazing playoff series of the organization ever had. But he was an interesting guy, very interesting guy. He didn't stray much into talking about politics. He had a wealth of information about baseball, a little bit about basketball, and and we'd talk about the team that we were covering and how it was playing, and I won't go into that necessarily because Norm was he had a blunt side to him also.
He certainly was opinionated.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, when it came to that.
But the funniest things happened to him when we were just traveling. I mean, he was like a magnet for mishaps.
Like what? What can you tell me? At least a PG story.
Well, yeah, we were going into Wheeling, and everybody hated going into Wheeling because there was no place to eat there. I mean, physically, there was one nightclub and one bar.
Having been to Wheeling a few times for some family stuff, I can vouch for that. Yeah.
And God bless those folks. I mean, what passes as downtown there was still circa 1950-ish, and it was just a gray, dingy, sad place. And we'd go in there, and so it was the one place that Norm would rush to eat in the press room at, because he knew there was no other food alternative happening. So we're in there one night, and he's eating this big bowl of chili, and these two old ladies, I think they were both centurions. They were monitoring the press room, and they were talking to each other. And the one said, "That was a great idea. How you managed to cook that much chili? I didn't think I had any pots big enough to do it." And the other lady goes, "Yeah, but then I looked out in the yard and there was the dog's bathing bowl. And we just cooked it right up in that." Norm never looked up. It's pregame. He's wearing his Cubs hat. It's down over his eyes. He never looked up, slowly put his spoon back in the bowl, got up, walked out of the place, and tossed it in the garbage along the way.
Little dog dish chili was not exactly his recipe, was it?
That stuff happened to him all the time. I mean, we're sitting there, we're sitting in Huntington, and one night, and we just wanted to get a drink, and we must have been sitting there. The place is empty, but we must have been sitting there for like 40 minutes, and finally his little guy shows up at the table, and sweat pouring off of him. He's wearing an apron that's got food and garbage smattered all over it. And he goes, "I'm sorry about that. The waitress got drunk and went home, and the cook quit. So I'm the dishwasher. I'm also doing the drinks and the cooking. What can I get for you?" And Norm goes, "How about a light for my cigarette?" And that was it.
West Virginia seems to bring out the best in you guys, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I'll tell you, I can't say I had a lot of good experiences there.
You were talking about the Cubs a minute ago. So, of course, then it leads to my next question, I guess, diverging from hockey a little bit. As a lifelong Indians fan, how'd you feel in 2016 during the World Series and after the World Series, more importantly?
Well, I mean, like I got my guts stomped out. I mean, I'd been through it in 95 and 97. In 97, I was the last baseball game I got to see with my father. We went to Game 5 of the World Series together. And, the disappointment of those two great teams, which Jim Thome was on, not quite being able to finish it, and watching that 97 team in Game 7 be one strike from winning a championship and then going on to lose, was tough. was tough.
Yeah.
And then 2016 rolled around, and all those years had gone by, and I sat there and I watched the Indians take a 3-1 lead in the series, and it was like floating. It was too good to be true, you know. And I was dreading what might happen, but I let myself believe, yeah, this is it. My dad's looking down at this. He would love this. And I thought about him there, and the lead went to 3-2, and then 3-3, and then it's Game 7, and just it didn't happen. And I've not the name of my rotisserie baseball, my fantasy sports baseball team is not in my lifetime. And as
a Cubs fan, I totally can relate to that. And that's why it was, even though I was exhilarated that the Cubs won,
sure.
at the same time, it was like I felt terrible for you and a lot of other Cleveland fans too, because it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're cousins on the baseball fan spectrum, you know, and I with a little bit of time removed, I felt very good for guys like you and Joe Bates, who are colleagues and lifelong friends and Cub fans. And I'm so glad that if it had to happen, it happened to another franchise and a group of fans who had been long suffering.
Speaking of Jim Thome, next month we'll find out if he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame on his first ballot. You think he's going to get in?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the guy played it clean, played it right. He was immensely popular with the media, just a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, boy, his numbers, I mean,
they speak for themselves, don't they? 612 homers or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm casting a ballot, that's a no-brainer, you know. And it'll be interesting to see if his old Indians teammate Omar Vizquel makes it in too. When I interviewed Thome a couple of weeks ago when he was here, he says that he thinks Vizquel, with all respect to Cardinal fans and their guy, is the greatest defensive shortstop he's ever seen of all time.
Make a good case for him, there's no doubt.
Yeah. And by the way, I was technically still am a part owner of the Indians. People don't realize that.
I was, you know what? I think I might have known that, but I wasn't sure.
That's something that Norm Ulrich would tell people all the time.
Now, how does that work? I mean, do you buy a share of it someplace?
I bought a share of Cleveland Indians ownership stock when it was in the 90s, in the World Series era, and was owned by Dick Jacobs back then. And years later, when he sold the team, I didn't give my share up. It's mine. It's framed and still on my wall.
Well, good. I think the next time the Cubs play over there, you can get me pretty good tickets.
Absolutely. Right? We can buy them together on StubHub.
Did the Cavaliers winning the NBA title, did that, you know, Cleveland's been this long-suffering team or town when it comes to pro sports franchises. You look at the Indians, you look at the Browns, you look at how bad the Cavs were, especially in the 70s when Ted Stepien owned them, and afterward. Did LeBron coming back and them winning it, did that make things a lot better in a lot of ways? I know basketball's not your main thing, but at the same time, it had to be good for the city.
Well, as you just said, basketball is a fourth for me, but I watched I watched every minute of that, and not because I was a Cavaliers fan, which it's give or take for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching it as a Cleveland sports fan, you know, and being able to see one of the major league level teams in my lifetime finally win a championship there, and the response to all my fellow travelers there, my fellow sufferers, if you will, that was amazing. And I've got the final 6.5 minutes of that game and the fan reaction, and then I've got footage of the parade and all that, and I still watch it about once a week when I'm sitting there in my little library office late at night, and it still gives me goosebumps. And you know, it just was meaningful to have that sense of being part of a fan base that has a team that's the best at something. Was a relief. It's a sense of relief and joy.
Yes, I think the Cubs felt the same way. You know, it was
absolutely.
relief and joy. You know, overwhelming joy, but also overwhelming relief.
Yes,
it's like you don't have that burden on you anymore.
Right.
So we won't even talk about the Browns then.
hopeless.
I watched the end of that game against the Packers the other day, and it's like, oh, come on, not even the Browns can do something like this, right?
Just unbelievable. You know, and that one hurts from and we're sports guys as professionals, so I know a lot about that franchise and its history, and it really hurts to see one of the great franchises in the NFL be tainted like this. It's hard to watch it. It really is. I watch those games because I'm a huge Browns fan, and I'm disheartened.
Yeah, I can't say. But, the Bears are bad, but they're not quite that bad.
I mean, that's it. All started with Art Modell. Don't get me wound up on him.
We'll save that for the next podcast. How about that?
Because that team was a dynasty from the 40s through 1964, and he ran off Jim Brown, he ran off Paul Brown, and later on he ran off Bill Belichick. Would we need any of those guys for?
Yeah. So what? Who needs an owner or a coach and a player like that?
And then he ran off with our team, and really a lot of Browns fans would tell you today that our team never really came back. It's been there for 20 years in the expansion Browns 2.0 version, but it's just not the same right now.
No. Before we get out of here, I want to get just some quick hits from you, a little bit about the Rivermen again. What are your 5 favorite teams that they've had? If you can't come up with 5, just your favorite couple.
Certainly that 90-91 championship team, where they were national news in the game. They were in the hockey news. They were on live TV the night they set the win streak record. They had all Canada and AP and all kinds of media following them, and that team produced 15 players and a head coach that went to the NHL the next season, and I think probably could have functioned intact as an NHL expansion team, maybe won 20 games. So there's that team, and the 99-2000 team under Don Granato with Jason Christie that won the Kelly Cup in that storied finals series against Louisiana. That was a thrilling series. The 3 games that they played down in Louisiana after losing the first 2 here in Peoria, sweeping 3 down there in a place where Louisiana had won 22 straight home games.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Was amazing. And they were epic knockdown, drag-out battles. The goaltender, Dwayne Dirksen, referring to it as Braveheart in the crease. and they really were those kind of games. The Rivermen had a couple of teams in the 90s, early 90s under Paul McLean that seemed destined to be champions. They won 50 games. They won the Eastern Conference title, and they were derailed when that terrific little center, Michel Mongeau, suffered a terrible injury.
The Chris Tamer thing, right?
The Chris Tamer incident. And he was really never the same player after that. And those teams were poised to really, really be powerhouses and didn't quite get there. But Paul McLean was a lot of fun to work with, and just an intense big bear of a guy.
Yep.
And then under Jean-Guy Trudel here in this SPHL, I really enjoyed this 2015-16 team that set 23 league records and won the regular season by 16 points. And God bless them, they couldn't win it in the finals, and really ran into some tough breaks there.
All time, who are your favorite players?
Let's see. Darrell May, the goaltender with the Rivermen and Blues, who, along with you, was in my wedding.
That's right.
Yeah.
He didn't have to wear his pads that day, though. He probably should have left those at home.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, he was a good athlete, though. And I think Mongeau certainly was just a really cool guy to be around and work with. Doug Evans, who came and went to the NHL back and forth and ended up, when it was all told, parts of 11 seasons in Peoria and played over 700 games here. a magnificent captain. Yeah. And guys like Darren Maloney, who was a solid captain in the ECHL era. And I really enjoyed Trudell here, too. The current Rivermen head coach was a good kid as a rookie in the ECHL, and a grown man later on, coming back from Europe when he rejoined this franchise in the AHL. So there's no shortage of those guys. I was looking the other day. I think it's coming up on 1,000 players that have come through here.
It's amazing.
Over 36 years, and great coaches. And I mean, Peoria has such a footprint in the NHL today, from what it's produced at this level over 36 years.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about guys like Bob Plager and people like that have coached here.
Plager was fantastic. It was a riot to be around and to work with. And Tony Twist was one of my favorites also. I mean, I remember a night when he fought a guy from, I think it was Salt Lake, Clark, and the first time they fought in that particular game wasn't a real great fight. They both ended up on the ice, clutching and grabbing. And they came out of the penalty box and they went right back at it again. And I asked him afterward, I said, why'd you guys do that? And he goes, well, he was in my wedding and my best man. And we decided the first fight we had was garbage. And we really wanted to go at it. And besides, he wanted to mark me up because I'm having him over for dinner after the game tonight.
That's awesome.
Lunatics in a great way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you ever sat down and figured out how many games you've covered?
Boy. Somebody asked me. Oh, the team was asking me that. This is a sign of when people think you're getting old, when the players start asking if they can carry your equipment bag for you.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it's the ultimate coming down to earth right there. Yeah, somebody asked me that in October, and it's coming up on 2,000. Yeah.
Is there one that sticks out?
One game?
One game.
Oh man, I hate you. Boy, wow. I mean, there are so many. I think, obviously, championship night games are great to cover, and they're a bit of a blur. But I'd have to go with the middle overtime, double overtime game in Louisiana in the Kelly Cup Final Series.
Which was not a championship game, correct?
No.
Right.
It's one of the games that got them back here to win it. And game number 15 in the Rivermen's record 18-game win streak in 90-91 was a home game here at Carver Arena. They trailed Salt Lake City in that game 3-1 with only 7 minutes left in the game. And I can remember hearing Norm Ulrich down at the other end of press row saying, "Here come the Rivermen," as they just started. That team just turned on a switch. And it was wave after wave after wave of attacking pressure. And they scored 3 goals in those last 7 minutes to tie it. And the game went into a shootout, penalty shot tiebreaker. And it was the captain, Dave Tomlinson. Standing at center ice. And again, I remember Ulrich's call was, "I won't tell you, you'll hear it." And he just skated in, shot, and the place... literally, the table was vibrating. The place was shaking so hard. That was a thrilling game to cover. Very easy to get caught up in it.
This was a lot of fun, Dave. We should do this again sometime.
Yeah, anytime. I love it.
That was great. We got enough material to go for like 3 more hours. But, we'll give people a little bit of a break, like in between periods, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we'll zam the table here right now.
Thank you very much, Dave Eminian,
right,
for being here from the Journal-Star, longtime Rivermen beat writer. And that's it for us. We'll see you next time on Nick in the Morning, the podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching.